Hello, welcome to the critical move of Telesur. United States versus Iran. It would seem like the never-ending story, right? But lately, Washington has not been doing very well in its attempt to maintain sanctions against Iran, as we have seen in recent Security Council sessions. How is the traditional hegemonic power doing after this setback within the United Nations? Is a new era opening in favor of the Persian country and its nuclear program? Let's deploy the board. We're making the first move. On August 19th, after the UN Security Council refused to extend the sanctions against Iran, two votes against, Russia and China's, plus 11 abstentions, President Donald Trump announced that his administration will continue to insist on imposing its policy of suffocation against the sovereign nation. Let's remember how the American president had instructed his official and what happened next. I instruct Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to notify the UN Security Council that the United States intends to restore virtually all previously suspended UN sanctions against Iran. It's a step backwards. I congratulate the United States on its decision to activate sanctions against Iran. It's the right decision. Just in 2018, the United States made the right decision when it withdrew from the dangerous nuclear deal with Iran. That agreement should never have made. It did not block the path on Iran to be bombed. It paved the way for the bomb. The fact that the Security Council did not act was a failure to protect international peace and security. This failure makes the Security Council complete in arming the murderous regime of Iran. Fortunately, President Trump and Secretary Pompeo have refused to accept it. Responsible countries must support the United States in finding a real solution, one that will prevent Iran from building nuclear weapons. Israel proudly and strongly supports the United States. The tyrants of Iran must understand this. If they are going to be treated like a normal country, they must start acting like a normal country, and that has not happened yet. The United States is no longer a participant in the Joint Comprehensive Action Plan, and therefore, it cannot activate the rollback mechanism. The status of the United States changed when it ceased to be a participant in the Joint Comprehensive Action Plan in 2018. The United States unilaterally withdrew from the global agreement on the Iranian nuclear issue. It has renounced its right to participate in the global agreement, and therefore has no right to demand a reversal. The 13 member states of the UN Security Council sent a letter to oppose the US, seeking to initiate the fast-track mechanism. This reflects the position of the vast majority of the members of the Security Council and the broad consensus of the international community. Once again, unilateralism is unpopular, and harassment will not succeed. This day will go down in the history of our Iran and in the history of the struggle against global arrogance. Look at how humiliated the United States is and the power of the Joint Comprehensive Action Plan, which has been damaged by the crimes of the United States and Israel, is half alive, but it defeated the United States. The Trump management is not afraid to remain a limited partnership in this matter. In light of the unmistakable truth that guides our actions, I am only sorry that other members of this board have lost their way and now are accompanying terrorists. We share the U.S. concern about the expiration of the arms restriction to go in October of this year. As E3 foreign ministers have said, the expiration of the restrictions could have serious implications for regional security, given Iran's continued destabilizing activities. E3 members believe that we must continue to address the current problems arising from the systematic failure of E3 to meet their commitments under the Joint Comprehensive Action Plan through ongoing dialogue among all E3 participants as part of the dispute resolution mechanism discussions. Here are some of the statements, but let's review in detail how the UN Security Council pronounced itself on the U.S. proposal to extend the arms embargo to Iran as part of its sanctions policy.
El pasado 14 de agosto,
On August 14th, the U.S. failed to get the necessary votes to pass its draft resolution aimed at extending the arms embargo to Iran. The American proposal was vetoed by Russia and China. Germany, United Kingdom, and France abstained, along with another 8 Council members. Resolution 2231 imposes a conventional arms embargo on the Persian nation that deprives it of acquiring, selling, or transferring military equipment directly or indirectly from its territory. However, the withdrawal of the U.S. from the nuclear agreement with Iran in 2018 inhabits this legal and political country to use the resolution, approved by the UN Security Council in the framework of the Joint Comprehensive Action Program. Resolution 2231 expires next October 18th. For that reason, the U.S. proposes to extend the arms embargo on the Persian nation to 13 more years. The extension or not of Security Council Resolution 2231 was then put on the table. Let's see what this regulation is about. On July 20, 2015, the UN Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2231, giving it full powers over the Joint Comprehensive Action Plan, signed between the Persian nation, the 5 permanent members of the Council, and the European Union. The ruling traced a new path in relations between the West and Iran regarding their nuclear program, as it validated a series of coercive measures as a guarantee of that committed to nuclear non-proliferation. But what restrictions does this resolution complete? Total limitations on the acquisition, sales, and purchase of military weapons by the Persian nation, measures in the financial, banking, and insurance fields, restricting financial transactions to and from Iran, sanctions regarding the import of Iran oil, gas, and petrochemical products, as well as measures for the inclusion of persons, entities, and bodies in the list of freezing of assets and prohibition of visas. I invite you to check some digital information. Let's see FV Agency on August 55. UN Security Council will not act on U.S. request on Iran sanctions. Indonesia, which this month occupies the rotating presidency of the UN Security Council, assured this Tuesday that it does not foresee taking any steps regarding the request of the U.S. to re-establish sanctions against Iran, given the lack of consensus in the body. Last week, the U.S. initiated a procedure before the United Nations to recover the international sanctions against Iran that were lifted with the 2015 nuclear agreement, arguing that the Iranian government has failed to comply with these obligations. Telesur also addresses the issue, but from another perspective. Iran and International Atomic Energy Agency restart nuclear cooperation. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, began an official visit to the Islamic Republic of Iran with the aim of opening a channel of fruitful, cooperative, direct, and necessary dialogue on nuclear matters with the authorities of that country. In a joint conference with the President of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Ali Akbar Salehi, on Tuesday, both officials welcomed the mutual determination to start a new chapter of cooperation. At the hearing, Grossi predicted an improvement in the development of cooperation between Iran and the United Nations. For his part, Salehi expressed his hope that the collaboration would continue to expand with satisfactory results for both parties. International Atomic Energy Agency Director has stressed that the good harmony between his agency and its Iranian counterparts. He said friendship and the spirit of commitment and cooperation have always existed between us. As I said, the United States is saying that it will not go without doing anything. I suggest you the reading of an article titled United States versus Nuclear Agreement, Chronicle of a Failed Unilateralism, published on Hispan TV digital site. I will read some paragraphs. The U.S. insists on considering itself a member of the nuclear agreement to try to reactive sanctions against Iran, putting pressures on others even if they do not feel the same way. In a bizarre political maneuver, Pompeo seeks to demonstrate through a series of legal wiles that the U.S. is still no one of the member countries of the nuclear agreement, a position that totally contradicts the previous statements made by the high authorities of the current U.S. administration, who have expressed no efforts to make it clear to the international community that the Nations of Stars and Stripes is not a member of the IACP since May 8, 2018, when Trump announced its country withdrawal from the multilateral agreement. Thus, this new poll by the White House hawks is simply an attempt by the U.S. to gain some sort of legitimacy for its unilateral actions at the global level, and it acknowledged that most international actors do not support its illegal approaches because they know full well that the current U.S. administration is very prone to violate international law very easily. The U.S. authorities are relying on Article 10 of Resolution 2231 to still consider the U.S. as a participating member of the nuclear agreement, a right to restore to the use of the mechanism, and therefore insist that the U.S. has the dispute resolution mechanisms of the IPCC. Likewise, Washington assures that the request for the immediate reactivation of Security Council sanctions against Iran has nothing to do with whether or not the U.S. is a member of the nuclear agreement, since they argue that if it depends on this condition to be able to resort to the use of immediate reactivation, the next should have expressly included a clause indicating that only the membership of some member state would allow this country to make use of the other clauses contemplated in the nuclear pact. With these interpretations, if the U.S. insists on unilaterally wanting to activate the IPAC dispute resolution mechanism, it will face the logical opposition of European countries, and especially China and Russia. The implementation of his mechanism by a country outside the agreement is a wrong and unilateral procedure, and not only questions the credibility of the Security Council more than ever, but is even a clear insult to the member countries of the nuclear pact. Having made this recommendation, I propose you to participate with us through our strategic move in social media. Will the U.S. be able to go over the top of the UN Security Council in its desire to extend its capricious sanctions against Iran? What did this body show with this recent refusal to extend the arms embargo on Iran? Leave your opinion. Let's take a short break. We'll be back soon. The withdrawal of the U.S. from the nuclear agreement, the reestablishment of sanctions against the Iranian economy, and the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani at the beginning of the year are facts that add to the escalation of tensions between the United States and Iran. Let's review. After the U.S. withdrawal from the nuclear agreement with Iran in May 2018, tensions between the two nations intensified, framed by economic conflicts, mainly due to the restrictive measures imposed on Tehran by the White House.
In
In 2005, during the government of Barack Obama, the agreement was signed by Iran with Germany and the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council: China, United States, France, United Kingdom, and Russia. The pact was seen as an attempt to bring Washington and Tehran closer together. The conflict intensified again in May 2019 with the deployment of more military assets in the Persian Gulf region after receiving intelligence reports of an alleged campaign by Iran and their representatives to threaten U.S. troops and the shipment of oil across the Strait of Hormuz. Last year, the U.S. blamed Iran for the explosions on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman, which increased military tensions. In addition to this situation, the United States decided to impose its so-called sanctions on the Persian country to prevent its military presence on Arab borders from being maintained, as well as to try to weaken it as a nuclear power, in addition to slowing down its economic development. On January 3rd of this year, the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, who lost his life in a drone attack authorized by Trump administration in Iraq, put both nations on the edge of a conflict with global impact. Soleimani was the highest-ranking military officer in Iran. He was considered an extremely important figure, especially for his leadership in the guardianship of the Islamic Revolution. Last June, the government of Hassan Rouhani requested from Interpol to the arrest of a current occupant of the White House and another 30 people involved in the murder of the high military command. As part of this escalation of tensions, the U.S. Department of State recently sanctioned 5 captains of the Iranian ships that moved for the 1.5 billion barrels of gasoline and other supplies to Venezuela in the context of the cooperation between Tehran and Caracas. We start the analysis. We have from Chile, Francisco Colán, sociologist, former UN official, and we have from Spain, Aníbal Garzón Baeza, also sociologist and international analyst. He's with us through the telephone line. Francisco, first of all, I want your evaluation about the Security Council regarding this attempt by the United States to extend the validity of this resolution that is about to expire in the month of October, and that in one way or another is in charge of certifying the arms embargo to Iran. How are you, Ray? Always nice talking to you. The Security Council is working properly. In previous meeting, there were only 11 abstentions, and I was a little bit surprised. And there is also the issue of where any kind of action using the Council of the veto power of Russia and China to fulfill with any postponement with the embargo. It seems to me that the Security Council it needs a contundency of 9 votes, and it won't have it. So I think that they're working on the basis of what is the United Nations letter. That is, there was an embargo with a specific date, and as long as it doesn't fulfill that determined date, we see two positions. What United States is doing right now is a desperate act. It's very desperate, because if you remember a couple of days ago, Iran practically was the center, along with China, of course, with its speech regarding international policy. It also spoke about the assassination of General Yamani. So I thought, it seems to me that is something really weird. I would call it a dignity matter. But we see that they're trying to reverse what is domestically imposed. Also, when we see the issue of the pandemic, which has affected the economy, would say that it is an electoral menu to win the presidential elections. And in this attempt to place the international issue on their electoral menu, quoting your own words, Francisco, how to also interpret the position of the U.S. administration, to call it by name, the position of Donald Trump's administration, who is saying that it's not interested on the Security Council's determination of what it has recently determined about not extending this resolution, but it will continue in other instances. That is, he intends to go over the UN Security Council. Is the United States thinking about leaving the Security Council as well? The United States of Donald Trump, which has left practically all international organizations. Well, it can't do it. It can. It's not possible, because it would have to change the UN letters and the prerogatives and all the principles of membership the United States has with the UN. Let's just say that self-exclude from the Security Council is not possible. But secondly, they're going to go back to the Security Council. And so within the embargo that was stipulated last time, they were trying to see if... So they're now wanting to bring this issue back on the table. As they say that the embargo is an essential matter when it comes to Iran and the region. We cannot forget that all this policy, I would say, nonsense when it comes to the principles of multilateralism, especially the United States. This responds to the presence of Israel in the United States and at a global level. Also, the United Kingdom and Germany, fortunately, and I said fortunately because this presidential election is changing it, and it's changing the domestic policy in the United States. So Trump's administration is trying to accomplish, let's just say that it's trying to do whatever it takes to get all the support within the United States, and it's trying to get a lot of support. So it seems to me that this show, I call this a show, it's a grotesque show. It's a very big word. Let's say it's a bad adjective in the sense that domestic policies, when it comes to presidential elections, it seems to me that it is practically ending up previous global issues. That seems to me that when it comes to the arms embargo in Iran and the background, it's like a global nuclear threat. And this is what people must take on consideration as viewers. We need to think about that. This is something at a global level. Let's say that Iran, it is a global agreement. This is a fundamental matter of nuclearization when it comes to having the control over the situation. So it is very important that it goes back to security within the framework and the prerogatives that United Nations has. United States cannot escape this possibility, and it cannot start making his hegemony to function. I would practically want, it's like killing two birds with just one stone. Stay with us. Let's add Aníbal to the analysis. I remind the viewers that he is with us through the phone line. Aníbal, welcome to our critical move. Do you agree with Francisco about the idea that that just happened recently and that is continuing its course on the part of Donald Trump's administration is nothing more than an election show in the middle of an election campaign and pressured by the Senate side? Greetings to you.
Donald Trump, que fue financiada por la revista sionista.
This was financed for looking at the role of Israel in this conflict. We're talking about actors at a regional level in the Middle East and all this constant blockade against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And who has had the consequences on this financial? Well, we see the diplomatic international conflict, as we see with the change of the embassy in the United States in Jerusalem. That in the first place, and secondly, is a speech that Donald Trump, when trying to have that unipolar and bilateral position at all times. It hasn't had with Obama had with his Democrat Party. Such as back in 2015 as the sanctions that it had towards Cuba. So what it's trying to make a difference at all the times is that the United States, despite what the international community says or not, but this is bringing some consequences, some sort of it's even generating an international mockery on Diaz, where everyone is saying no. We see the conflict, the constant conflict again is with Russia. And we've seen what has been the vision of that right now Donald Trump is. This has been a diplomatic mockery against this unipolar policy of United States and Israel. That's why the international community, and as well as the European Union, alongside with the United States, has followed the script. And it's important to see what has called on England, Germany, and United Kingdom to follow on with that pact with cooperation with Iran, because Iran is an oil country producer. And also, we have to take that into consideration. Aníbal, in the center of the European Union, we see how Germany behaves in a more neutral way in front of matters of this nature. Instead, the United Kingdom is more partial. Why? Although it's evidently no longer part of the European Union. Yes, that is correct. At all the time, United Kingdom has had a very close relationship with the United States at a cultural and economic level. We see that United Kingdom heard about the invention where that Bosch carried out against Iran. So France and other European Union countries said no. And Saddam Hussein, Iran with the European Union, in this case it's the same thing. Germany is the economical motor that European Union has. And the United States has its own identity. And in this conflict, same conflict as is with Russia. So in Europe, there is two positions: the position of sovereignty and independency to send away the United States. And then there is another position, which is the one that is fulfilling the interest. So Europe is completely divided, and we're seeing this new Europe that is trying to carry on the European Union by itself, because the European Union it's been like a puppet of the United States. Europe has generated different topics. It also generated an army that has sent to Germany, because the strategy and interference policy from the United States, and to have good relationship with countries with Russia, which also has borders with the European Union. The European Union with Belarus to fulfill with this. Now, with the withdrawal of the United Kingdom, with the Brexit, the United Kingdom will come a little bit closer to the policy of the United States, commercial and political all the time. It's been a piece and a puppet that it didn't even took part on it with the euro, this economic currency. So it's been the bad boy of the international geopolitics. So its neutral role, it's going to fulfill it all the time. We see closest countries such as Iran, because we see that back in 2003 that this rupture that was between Europe and the United States, the United Kingdom as well. Thank you, Aníbal. Francisco, we see that this happens practically at the same time that the visit of the delegation of OEAE to Iran takes place. And the maximum representative of this organism says that the relations are going better than ever, that they're going to work from now on in a more joint way. So, to what extent is one fact the consequence of the other one? Well, the visit was a programmed visit. The International Agency of Atomic Energy. It was about to take one step of regulation and control, something that Iran has fulfilled. Let's say the energy, the atomic energy, and from this point of view, it's on the right direction, as our colleague said, in the sense that the hegemony of the United States, even to transatlantic alliance in Europe. So today the division is policy regarding Iran, as well as he said he couldn't apply his hegemony as a neutral way. And this transatlantic alliance is wounded. So the intervention of the International Agency of Atomic Energy it's very important. We see this regarding the invasion to Iraq. They have proved that Iraq didn't have weapons with a special transmission. So, however, this agreement was proposing as an invasion of the United States in Iran. So this has been too much analyzed under the media and under the pressure of the powers. So it has to be a neutral organism. It has to seek for the solid ground. So that's why I think that this visit is fundamental, despite of what is going on right now as part of the programming. But it's committed to follow the steps regarding the nuclear development and the International Council. Thank you, Francisco. And as Francisco stated, the International Atomic Energy Agency, like all international agencies, must be a neutral institution. And when I say I like all international agencies, I am thinking, for example, of the OPEC. And this question is for Aníbal. Is there not a risk that at some point in the history of the International Atomic Energy Agency, we withdraw its serious report on the situation with Iran, as did the OPEC report on the presence of alleged chemical weapons in Syria? Yes, well, I think that this organization, we need to take into consideration the neutral word is a very complex word. And when we see the United States has the support by the Western international community, like in this case the European Union, so they probably would exert some influence in some organisms. And therefore, since today there is a position more in favor of negotiating with Iran, the international community, as we are seeing right now, what just happened in the UN Security Council. So from one side, the United States might try to direct what, because we see the science is always behind with a political touch. So the policy of the United States and atomic energy, it will have a position more favorable to a scientific level, more objective. Well, we are losing communication with Aníbal, but Aníbal, thank you anyway for these reflections that you have offered to the viewers of Telesur, and I also thank Francisco for your presence in our program today. Let's take another break in our critical move. Remember, there's a strategic move in social media for you to participate. Will the U.S. be able to go over the top of the UN Security Council in its desire to extend its capricious sanctions against Iran? What did this body show with its recent refusal of extend arms embargo on Iran? Stay with us. We'll be right back very soon. Owner of the fourth largest oil reserves in the world and ranked among the top gas reserves in the world as well, Iran has gained prominence in the Persian Gulf. Let's put it in context. Iran is the second largest producer of the Organization of Oil Exporting Countries, OPEC, after Saudi Arabia. In addition, it shares with Qatar the largest gas field on the planet, the South Pars North Dome. In terms of commercial relations, the Persian nation is a key player in the Middle East, as it has solid relations with Russia and has the support of Europe after the unilateral withdrawal of the United States from the nuclear agreement. Iran's geopolitical influence gains strength by being an important center of communication between the Middle East, Central Asia, and South Asia. Its proximity to commercial routes, such as the Strait of Hormuz, where nearly 20% of the world's oil transits. The Suez Channel, the Persian Gulf, and the Gulf of Oman position it as a strategic enclave. Recently, the Iranian government announced the discovery of oil reserves of great transcendence in the area. The discovery awakened the interest of Western powers. Tehran is also an important actor in the Chinese project, the Strip the Road, a strategy that would generate important changes in geopolitics, since experts affirm that its development could put an end to the economic dominance of the United States through trade in national currencies and not in dollars. The Islamic Republic has demonstrated against U.S. interference in the Persian Gulf area. It has made it clear that it does not seek tensions, but rather to ensure its territorial integrity in the face of any aggression, in the interest of preserving security in the waters of the strategic Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, and the Sea of Oman. President Hassan Rouhani proposed last September before the General Assembly of the United Nations the creation of a peace coalition with nations of the area and without foreign forces. According to the Iranian military authorities, the security of the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf can only be guaranteed through the establishment of cooperation between the coastal countries and not with false coalitions. In the same line, Tehran has rejected the presence of the so-called naval coalition that leads the United States in the Gulf, and which began in November of last year. Significant are the links that it has established with Go in Latin America, as in particular with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. These two nations have strengthened their political and commercial relations in the midst of an illegal economic, commercial, and financial blockade that both are suffering on behalf of the Trump administration. We continue with the analysis. Now we have from Chile, Pablo Jofre, journalist and writer, master's degree in international relations. How are you, Pablo? It's nice to be here. Okay, Pablo, all this that happened in the center of the Security Council of the United Nations, I had kept this question for you. It happened in the same context in which a person apparently behaves as the second Secretary of State of the United States, I mean the head of the Colombian government. He released that information related to the alleged purchase of missiles by Venezuela to Iran, among other countries. How can you explain this matter for us to be able to understand it better? Well, we need to understand in the sense that the behavior of Colombian government, it's proper of an unconditional ally that only answers to the foreign policy and everything that comes from Washington. So in this matter, Ivan Duque's opinions, they are completely irrational. Trying to compare a situation of political military with sovereign countries such as Venezuela made undertake some sort of agreements and treaties. He can do it with any country it wants in the world. But this is all part of a plan. It's a plan of the United States in which one it's completely clear that it's about pushing on the Republic of Venezuela. It has been like that on the issue of Venezuela when it comes to take over Colombian territory to carry out some military interventions. And under this supposedly humanitarian aids, and only install their opposer groups. And it's having Colombia as a weapon against Venezuela. And in this sense, Duque's declarations only obey to one determination, orders that came from Washington. They obey to a situation that are tied to orders from the White House. It's not serious at all. And in the hypothetical case that they would like to buy weapons, well, it has its right to do so. Because the United States in the center of the Security Council, August 14 and also August 20th, when it failed in this idea against the Republic of Iran. It's all a gathering of elements that we see that it's going completely regarding what the United States is asking. I'd also like your observation on that particular, the failure of the Trump administration in front of the Security Council, where by majority some refused, others abstained to extend this resolution that certifies the arms embargo to Iran. And I want you to give me this reflection with a vision of the future, what could happen from now on. But there are some elements regarding what you just mentioned. First, it was a complete failure. Out of 15 votes that the Security Council has, the permanent Security Council, there's France and Great Britain, and another 6 that goes from time to time, and a joint of members of the Security Council. So that is the voting that was, according to the August. United States only have 1, Dominican Republic, that was under pressure from the American diplomacy. Another 2 countries rejected it, such as the cases of Russia and China, and another 11 countries, including Germany, France, and Great Britain, they didn't do it. But the United States, as it doesn't like to win, although it's constantly losing, reform to the world, decided to reactivate its mechanism against the Republic of Iran, and extended a letter to the president of the Security Council, who is now in charge of the presidency. And a couple of hours later, President of Germany also sends a letter to President of the Security Council saying that they don't approve and they're not going to be part of that mechanisms of sanctions. Another failure of Secretary Mike Pompeo and Trump's administration. So while it's what's left for them? So when it comes to the future and the perspectives, keep on sanctioning, keep on setting sanctions on Iran, and to establish military, diplomatic, political pressures. Venezuela has suffered it. It is part of that policy of maximum pressure that the United States is exerting on those who are not unconditional today. So, but the conditions are black for the United States. They're not going to succeed in this sense, and in the arms embargo, and they won't be able to activate these mechanisms. It's a complete failure. It's destined to win. We'll see in next November if we see if Joe Biden might win these elections and change the factors. We need to see this international policy of pressure to keep setting embargoes and setting sanctions against Iran. And also, it maintains the protection to all allies in international. So there are plans that have to do with the internal policies. We see the support of the electorate. At the same time, external policy to keep on assisting these unconditional allies that are trying to generate intervention. And so from those perspectives, those are the ones that the United States are going to continue pushing, and it's going to continue to be defeated on the international sense. So this, when we see Donald Trump, this absolutely evil person, is going to continue to increase sanctions against anyone who he considers enemy of the United States. And in the face of these progressive laws, progressive failure of the United States, we see that this semester has been practically the semester of Iran, the triumphs of Iran, right? That's right. That's right. That takes a responsible diplomacy, a diplomacy that has a trace line, that has an objective, that has its tragedy, that is not going on zigzag from one place to another, in a more popular saying. And under this pressure, while the United States looking, it's just threats and attacks on not supporting the international cooperation. Then the Republic of Iran, based on international law, has been very clear about this. We are signing the nuclear agreement, Russia, China, Iran. So the United States withdrew on the 2018. He has no right at all. And as he has no right at all, it cannot solicit right now to reactivate these mechanisms of sanctions. And its European allies, members of the NATO, with the military and economic bonds. Well, there has been a complete failure for the external policy of the United States, because diplomacy has other elements and other characteristics that are different. What the United States is trying to do is that everything should be carried out under imposition. So in this sense, I think that the external policy, diplomacy from Iran have shown sovereignty, dignity, and above all, maintaining a fixed line, which is very clear from the principle on the basis of the nuclear agreement, even when the United States withdrew on 2018 and has pointed out Europe that has to fulfill the nuclear agreement, or they have to establish what says in the Article 26 and 36 allows it regarding to nuclear plants, regarding uranium, regarding the whole nuclear program and plan. So this is a triumph. This is a diplomatic triumph, but most of all, a triumph of all those countries that do not obey the threats of the United States. Thank you so much. See you soon. Thank you so much. Let's go to conclusions. To the several stumbles the empire has had to deal with in the last few months, the influence of the pandemic, social discontent in American streets, an electoral campaign that does not favor the candidate for elections at all. It adds these setbacks suffered by the White House in the Security Council regarding Iran. As the old saying goes, lies have short legs, especially those of the hegemon, which are heavier than Newton's apple. Meanwhile, Tehran goes on with its truth, which should not take away anyone's sleep, and this is certified by organizations such as the one of the Atomic Energy in its most recent visit to Persian territory. So, can we see the light on the horizon? Will justice finally prevail over unilateral whims? Let's hope so. For today, we close the geopolitical board.